Well, my guest today is Siddhartha Kara. He's the author of a new book called Cobalt Red: How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives. It is a bestseller, but I warn you, it is not a feel good book. He has gone to great lengths to expose how many of us are dependent on cobalt, the mining of cobalt, which runs every rechargeable device that probably you have in your home, and how many human lives are destroyed by this from Congo. So thank you so much for joining me. I've really been looking forward to talking to you.
It's my pleasure to join you for the conversation. Thank you.
So, can you summarize your findings about all of the slave labor that goes on in the Congo and how so much of it is kept from us, and just maybe give us a snapshot of how devastating it is for these human lives?
Well, the summary is this. Right now, there's an enormous invasion of the human rights of the people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as massive environmental destruction and toxic contamination relating to the mining of cobalt. Now, the reason this is important, as you mentioned in your remarks, cobalt is used in the manufacture of almost every lithium ion rechargeable battery used in the world today. So, every smartphone, tablet, laptop, and crucially, almost every electric vehicle, and about three-fourths of the world's supply of cobalt is mined in the Congo in utterly destructive, hazardous, miserable conditions that almost feel like we're back in colonial times.
And so, some of the things that you point out are not just exploitation of women, because these are cultures where women are regularly assaulted, not just exploitation of children, but also slave labor, where these children are basically forced into working for these. What do you call them? The guy you call Zeus in the book. Um,
Negotiation. And
okay.
there's soldiers, there's traders, there's militia, there's Republican Guard. There's a whole array of people who are using violence to coerce the local population, including children, to get cobalt out of the ground. And the reason for this is there's just this feverish scramble. There's so much demand at the top of the chain by tech companies and electric vehicle manufacturers. And as we said, almost all the cobalt comes from the Congo. So there's this enormous fever, this rush, this scramble to get cobalt out of the ground as quickly as possible through whatever means possible. Everyone up the chain, from the companies at the top all the way down to a crazy soldier on the ground. They're all preying on this population of people who are so poor and vulnerable, and who we can't live without, because you and I can't function for 24 hours without cobalt.
Yeah.
So we rely on all this violence and misery and suffering in order to conduct our daily lives.
Right. So it's incumbent on us to not be willfully ignorant about it. When I mentioned to my husband that I was reading this book, he says, "Oh, no, I've read the Apple press releases." He's a fanboy. And he's like, "No, no, they say they only use sustainable and humanitarian practices." But you point out how they can say this with plausible deniability because of these depots, these middlemen where they buy from the depots and then they don't have to see the rest of it. Can you explain that?
Yeah, there's a bit of a shell game that's happening that allows companies at the top of the chain to say, well, I'm buying from ABC Mining Company, and ABC Mining Company tells me that there's no child labor in their supply chain, and they're using sustainable practices. And the reality is, when you actually get on the ground in the Congo, you see none of that is true. It's
Mhm.
all marketing, it's all puffery and PR. ABC Mining Company, all the mining companies, there are children digging inside those mines. They're there as plain as day for anyone to see, including the CEOs of these companies, if they bothered to go down to the Congo to see where their cobalt is coming from. Those companies have clear cut millions of trees, polluted the water, filled the dirt with toxic contaminants. But at the top of the chain, the story is everything's done sustainably. Don't worry, look the other way, carry on upgrading your phone every year, carry on with your gadgets and cars. So there's this disconnect between the stories told by the marketing teams in corporate America, in the global north, and the reality that the people in the Congo reveal. And that's what the purpose of Cobalt Red is to bring those voices and that ground truth out into a world that has no idea what's happening.
One of the things that was haunting is that there's no real architect or engineering there to say we're going to engineer some tunnels and then we can go down and safely mine cobalt. So they just willy nilly dig them. And then regularly people die in tunnel collapses.
That's the scramble. You see, there's no other way for people there to survive. You might say, well, can't they grow some onions or find some small business? The big mining companies have swallowed up the entire countryside. They get leased these enormous swaths of countryside to extract copper and cobalt, nickel that are used in the batteries. Now, when I say large swath of countryside, the largest mining concession in that part of the Congo, meaning the territory they're allowed to rip apart for copper and cobalt, is the size of London.
Oh,
And there's 15, 20, 25 of these concessions. So there used to be hundreds of thousands of people who lived in that territory. They were forcibly displaced by foreign mining companies, and now they have no other way to survive except to try to scramble back onto that ground where they used to live and dig cobalt out of the ground with their bare hands to earn $1 or two a day. Now, you mentioned the most hazardous thing, which is the tunnel digging, because as you go a little deeper, meaning 50, 100 feet down, the grade of cobalt, meaning like the purity of it, increases. So they might earn a little more money instead of $1 or $2, maybe $3 or $4. So this is the only way they have to survive. There's this pressure to earn more, so they have enough food to eat. They dig these tunnels. There's no rock bolts, no ventilation shafts. Cobalt is toxic to breathe. There's no supports, and every week these tunnels collapse. Now, Apple, Tesla, Google, Microsoft, Samsung, all these companies don't talk about that. They don't talk about that truth, but the ground is telling us what's happening, and that is children and young people being buried alive to feed cobalt up the chain.
the stories of the widows who know that their families are underground where they live. It's a lot. It's a lot. And it's important for us to know about them. Now, recently, Elon Musk said something like, oh, we're going to audit these. We're going to put cameras up. I noticed you spar a little with him on Twitter saying, this is not really a solution. Can you explain that?
Well, this gets back to that kind of corporate nonsense and PR and puffery that's put out at the top of the chain to sort of misdirect people or make consumers think and shareholders think that these CEOs are doing what needs to be done. And so Elon at the last Tesla shareholder meeting said, okay, I'm going to put a webcam in front of the mine. And if anyone sees a child going in there, you let me know and we'll audit it and we'll deal with it.
Oh, for
Well, what do
goodness
we
sakes.
just say? These
Right.
mines are as big as cities. Are
Yeah.
we putting 25,000 webcams to cover the entire thing? And what happens if they walk in at night? What happens if they walk in the other side where there's not a web? I mean, it's just such nonsense. It's so silly. What needs to happen is Elon, Tim Cook, all the rest of them need to get on the ground, understand the reality, accept accountability for the people digging their cobalt out of the ground, and then start talking about solutions rather than sitting 10,000 miles away minting money and putting out these ridiculous statements that, oh, we'll put a webcam in front of a mine that's the size of New York City, and
Right.
that'll cover it, and we'll see
Yeah.
the kids who are walking.
Or there was a non-government organization out of Washington that said, "Oh, we're going to do audits. We're going to do that regularly." And then when you asked when were the audits done, they're like, "We never did." No, that didn't happen.
It's all there's this whole smoke screen
Right.
because understandably, how are you and I supposed to know the truth of what's happening on the ground in the Congo? We would accept the statements of tech companies and NGOs who say they're doing certain things. Why wouldn't we? But the reality is, it's all just a charade.
One of the questions I have is whether or not any other country is mining cobalt in a humane way, because it is not only mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but it is maybe the most robust area for cobalt mining.
Well, yeah, last year almost three-fourths of the world's supply of cobalt came out of the Congo. So when you talk about cobalt, it's just Congo. So if you look at a chart of market share of cobalt production, it's Congo at roughly three-fourths of the world's supply. And then there's a bunch of countries that are 2%, 3%, 2%, 3%, like Australia, Russia, Canada, Morocco. I haven't been to Russia or Australia or Canada to look at their cobalt mining operations. I'm sure they're perfectly fine. I'm sure it's done sustainably. I'm sure people have hard hats and PPE to protect them, and they're paid a decent wage and so on. Um, but that doesn't solve the problem of where the cobalt, the world's supply of cobalt is coming from, which is in the Congo, where none of that's true. And then it makes us ask a question. Well, How come the people in the West get uniforms and PPE and decent wages and safety equipment, but the people in Africa don't? What what's the explanation other than, well, it's the people in Africa and they don't count as much?
Yeah, so there could absolutely be solutions. We're just willfully not doing it. Now you're critical of China's role in Congo, even though you point out there seems to be from some infrastructure improvement done by China's investment there. But it's almost this major cultural divide that doesn't seem to want to fix itself organically. The Chinese workers are benefiting from cobalt mines and tax favorable programs. The government is not using that tax dollar to invest in their country. So overall, I'm interested. Can you summarize where you are on Chinese investment in Congo and maybe in Africa in general? Because this seems to be a major thing that the world is watching, whether or not it's good for Africa to accept Chinese investment.
Well, the current dominant imperial force in Africa is China. I mean, some people call Africa China's second continent because they have gone from country to country and offered aid and infrastructure and loans and development assistance in exchange for access to raw materials and resources like cobalt, like copper, like lithium, and so on. And in Congo, they've uh, invested billions and billions of dollars to build roads and assist in infrastructure development, to provide loans to the government in exchange for access to copper and cobalt mines in particular. And they struck these deals at the dawn of the battery revolution, more than 13 or 14 years ago. So they saw where the future was going. The future was rechargeable batteries, and they locked down the supply chain. So they run 15 of the 19 major copper cobalt mining concessions in the Congo. That accounts for about 70 to 80% of cobalt production coming out of the Congo. It all flows to China for refining. They provide about 80% of the world's refined cobalt supply and probably build more than half of the rechargeable batteries in the world. So they have that supply chain locked down. They pay little concern to the human rights of the people in Africa, of the Congolese people, when they have road projects or other things that they're committed to. They don't even hire locally. They actually ship over Chinese people, get them to do the work for penny wages, and then send them back. So these development projects don't even provide employment for the local population. So it's a very one-sided relationship. The only real beneficiaries in the Congo are the political elite who pocket these big deals and bribes in order to sign deals that give the China access to all these resources.
And one of the major reasons that children continue to work in this industry is because their parents can't afford the fees for school, which is not free there, which is about $5 per child per month, right? And
Yes.
so if tech companies really wanted to do something and fund schools and things like that, I mean, if we're really talking about diversity programs, like this is a great place to get started. So you don't give us, though, as the reader, much to do. There's not much we can do. We can't get to the Congo. You could barely get in. All of the paperwork that was required for you to see things and not even bring your phone. You really put the solution into geopolitics. So is that a fair assessment? There's no like, oh, we need to boycott cars or anything. There's nothing really we can do other than educate ourselves. Is that fair to say?
No, there's more we can do. I mean, you're right. It's not up to you and I and consumers to get on the ground in the Congo and fix the problem. I mean, the truth is, we've been made unwitting participants in an enormous horror. When you bought your smartphone and I bought mine, or when someone buys an electric vehicle, they don't tell themselves, oh, 10 Congolese children are going to die so I can plug in my battery today. I mean, that's the reality. But that's not the bargain that's in our minds. That bargain has been forced upon us, and now we're unwitting participants in it. The responsibility for the supply chain resides with the companies creating demand for the resource. That's where the solutions have to start, at the top of the chain. There's a lot of bad actors every level down, but if it weren't for the enormous demand placed by tech and EV companies for cobalt, the entire chain wouldn't exist. Now, you and I can't get on the ground and solve the problems, but we can spread awareness. And this is how social change happens. First, a horror is revealed by truth seekers. Then people spread that truth all around the world. And inevitably, every time throughout history, when the world learns of a horror, there's a community of conscience that bands together and says this injustice cannot stand, and they drag the rest of humanity forward with their force of will, their moral authority, until that injustice is set right. And that's what will happen if we do our part, which is to continue agitating, spreading awareness, flooding the world with this truth that the Congolese people are screaming out if we just but listen to what they have to say.
Well, I appreciate that you have done this. This is something I had no awareness about. And I do recommend your book. Like I said, it's maybe not a beach read that's going to be fun, but it's really well organized. And I think it's got an amazing commitment to telling this story that otherwise was not told. So thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.